and then we're going to start the conversation. Couple of house rules. If you can keep your mics on mute, we'd appreciate that. We're going to record the conversation and share it on our YouTube page. And we want your question. We want it to be a very active and involved conversation. We're going to talk today about how to plan for an early wealth transfer. So put your questions in the chat. We really want that engagement. But I will let Andrew tell you a bit about himself, and then Steph, and then we start our conversation.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Ray. Ray has been a great mentor to me, as he mentioned before. We've known each other for a couple of years now, back when I started my first role as being an advisor with Sun Life Financial. A little bit personal information about me. I'm a family man. I have two beautiful daughters, ages 12 and 7. I really got into this business to make sure that the Caribbean community and Black people in general was able to get higher knowledge of estate planning and insurance planning from somebody that looks like them and that could understand where they're coming from. So that's my main why on what I love, what I do, is being able to communicate with people of color and just give them that information on how to properly create their estate and planning using life insurance as well.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Stefan, can you join the conversation, please?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen McMillan. As you can see, that's my father, Ray McMillan. As you mentioned, I was in the mortgage environment at an early age. I was licensed in 2017. The main reason why I wanted to join industry is primarily to help and assist people to grow their real estate knowledge and their wealth into real estate. Personally, about myself, I have a fiance that I'm very close with. My mom just joined a call. There's a few regular family members here that joined this call. So family is a big part of my life. On my downtime, I do listen to my vinyls and enjoy leisure time with my fiance. We're all here to educate about early wealth transfer, and I'm looking forward to hearing some questions and feedback from you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So we all know that there's a lot of conversation about transferring wealth from generation to generation. And when it comes to Black and Caribbean people, for many times we are sort of behind the 8 ball with that process. One of the biggest wealth creators for many of us will be the home we own, real estate. But how do we leverage that real estate? How do we leverage it to create intergenerational wealth? And should we wait till the person passes away to transfer the wealth to the next generation, or should we transfer it while they're still alive? I want to go a little deeper into the conversation. If you look on our screen, we see a graphic here of some very, very happy-looking Black folks. And obviously they have a stress in their lives, because when you're stressed out in your lives, you don't have that glow and that look. So it means that they've got a very interconnected family dynamic, which makes them able to look as happy as they do. So how can we all have that same look in our lives? The biggest wealth transfer is going to come from the baby boomers to the next generation. And boomers are those born between 1946 and 1964. I was born in the last year of the boomer generation. And it's supposed that we can transfer significant rent to our next generation. We're going to focus on Toronto, for example, right now for this conversation, because a lot of our guests are in Toronto. Some I think are in the US. But I mean, the concept applies internationally when it comes to creating wealth. In Toronto, the average home price in 2004 was $300,000. In 2024, the average home price for a similar home is $1.2 million. That means if you bought a home in 2024 and never refinanced it, you would probably have a net worth today or equity sitting in your principal residence of between $900,000 to $1.2 million, right? How do we educate clients on what to do with that money? And how do we prompt them to transfer that wealth prior to them being deceased, when it automatically it has to go to the next generation. And I'm going to start with Andrew, since he's in the arena of life and investment planning with his clients. You're muted, Andrew.
My apologies. So yeah, so that is a great point in the sense of how much money is actually going to be transferred. It's estimated about $1 trillion is supposed to be passed down to within the next decade from the boomer generation. And a lot of the conversations from my point of view is, one, is it better to wait until the passing of that parent or parents, or do it earlier? And that really is going to be dependent upon each family's situation and the purpose and the why of why they would want to transfer that money early. Now, a lot of the times, if we're looking at using equity in our property, 9 times or 8 times out of 10, it's because they want to be able to help that child or children be able to buy another property, or even a secondary property as a rental property if that's in their space. So when it comes down to accessing specifically equity in a property to be transferred to a child, I like to put it this way: there's a way to do it that's going to cause you havoc. There's the way that should properly be done, and then there's the best way. Now, depending on who you talk to as a profession, whether it be a tax professional, whether it be a lawyer or an advisor, they're all going to have a different opinion on how you should do it and what's the best way to do it. Now, the biggest concern is always going to be boiled down to taxes, which is, I think, what most people don't understand. What happens is when you give money to or transfer wealth to the next generation is taxes. And then the other side is what happens if that relationship, or if they're in a relationship, what happens to that gift that you're giving them? Does it become shareable with that spouse? And are you worried about that? And is that a concern? So it's really about the family dynamic that person is currently in. And then what's the purpose of that money going to be used for?
Okay. So how difficult is that conversation with your clients to start the early transfer?
It's a difficult one because they first start off with good intentions and great intentions. They said, you know what, I want to help my child out. And that's typically where it starts. So the why is coming from a wholesome place. But then when you start getting into the weeds of, okay, you realize that if you access equity from your property now, there's going to be tax considerations to you immediately. So you're basically disposing part of that property, giving it to your child, and you might have some tax consequences on that, which they may not be aware of. And then secondly is, okay, once that child gets the money, what are they doing it? What are they using it for? So there's a lot of questions that go into follow-up questions that kind of they have to think through. And then that could raise some concerns on the questions that they may not know really what that child is going to use the money for. If it's going to be a property, will their spouse be part of that gift? So it becomes a little bit more difficult.
Okay. Now, Stefan, you had the pleasure of working with a lot of homeowners over your almost a decade in the industry, and you've seen clients who bought homes. So you've inherited a client base from myself. Many of those people bought their homes back in the early 2000s for probably, a quarter of what they're worth today. Have you, as a mortgage advisor, spoken to clients about accessing their equity in their home? Before we go, let me tell you what equity is. Equity is the dollar figure of what your home, between what your home is worth, or what your home appraises for, and what you may owe a lender on a mortgage. So your home is worth $1 million based on the market value or recent appraisal, or based on what the comparable homes are being sold for, and you have a mortgage of $200,000 in your property, you have now $800,000 of equity sitting in that property, right? So the less you owe on your home based on the value of that piece of real estate, that's your equity. So back to the question. So having seen many clients who are probably in their 60s, late 50s and 60s, and probably in their 70s, when you speak with those clients who probably have children and grandchildren, there's a conversation about equity transfer to the next generation part of your mortgage planning conversation. You're muted, Zeb.
No, you can hear me?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily a conversation that I primarily discuss with the client. Normally, when they come to me, it's something totally outside of wealth transfer. But simply because I have the conversation about reverse mortgages, and that is a product that can be utilized to take out equity from your property and transfer wealth to your children. Lately, I've been more advocating that type of wealth transfer to our older clients, because at first, when it does come up, there's a lot of hesitation. Again, I don't want to get into the social economics of the Black family, but it is an important piece of reason why they don't do it. Some of them don't have the healthiest relationship with their children. They're a little hesitant to even transfer money to them. They feel like they may squander the money away. So it becomes a kind of a slippery slope speaking to our Afro, Caribbean and African clients. But it doesn't discourage me to keep on educating the client to the point where sometimes coming from a child myself, I share perspective from their children, and sometimes it does assist for them to maybe consider doing an early wealth transfer using the reverse mortgage product if it's applicable. But it's something that's kind of a duality where there's a deep hesitation to give them $500,000 to a child that you may not have a strong relationship, or you do, but there's always that back thought that they may think that they may squander it away, or they don't know what to do with it. But I always suggest, like, if the child is still living with you, and if they can buy a home, they can start their life, and you give them a head start to their home buying journey. And during the pandemic, the early gifting from the bank of mom and dad has really started to commence because of high interest rates. Prices of properties were very high. So people were taking equity from parents were taking equity from their properties to help their children get a head start, buy a condo or a small townhouse just to get their life started. And it goes a long way for the child to have some sense of pride in having a home for themselves, as opposed to having the challenge to come up with that down payment to buy a home.
Okay. So, I mean, I understand that there are pros and cons to doing this. And Andrew mentioned a couple in his comments earlier. But I want to let the audience know that we are not attorneys or tax professionals. So anything you have to do with your family and estate transfer of wealth, you want to speak to an insurance advisor, financial advisor, the mortgage advisor, in conjunction with a tax professional, usually an accountant, and an estate plan attorney, if you plan to really scale up the wealth and transfer your wealth wholesomely to the next generation. I did some research over the last few days about, the pros and cons of early transfer of money. And there's three primary pros for the early transfer of wealth between generations. The first one is the tax benefits. And what does that mean? It means if you transfer some of your wealth before you are deceased, then you may avoid, and I use this loosely, probate and estate taxes. Now, one of our future conversations, we're going to have an attorney on and dig into this concept a little deeper. The next advantage is wealth building. You know, if somebody bought a home 20 years ago or started a business 20 years ago, and they've had it for 10 or 15 years, usually the value would increase significantly between the time they bought it and the current time. So you've had a chance to build and create wealth organically. If you transfer your asset or some of your assets before you're deceased, when you're in your 50s or 60s, as opposed to when you're deceased, which is usually sometime between 80 and beyond, which is the life expectancy for most boomers today, you basically, quote unquote, robbed a generation of asset escalation in value or asset creation. The other advantage, and it's one that Stefan touched on, is people squandering the money. It's a learning opportunity for your heirs. So instead of giving them $500,000 all at once, you give them $100,000 and you put the remaining $400,000 in the vehicle. And Andrew has lots of vehicles he could use for that, using the infinite banking concept, and you transfer it at a later date. So those are the three primary advantages. What are the disadvantages? And again, Steph touched on one of those when he spoke about not having a good relationship with the parents. I want to self-care that if you transfer your wealth prematurely to your children or your grandchildren, then you may lose the opportunity of taking care of yourself properly. And we see many elderly Caribbean seniors who live by themselves, particularly women, and they don't have a very strong relationship with their children most of the time. They basically live in isolation. And even if they're homeowners, sometimes the quality of life is not necessarily there. And the other disadvantage is that you can lose appreciation in the asset. So you've got an impressive stock portfolio, you've got a home that's worth a lot of money, and you take all the equity out of it, or liquidate the stock portfolio, you can lose some of the wealth creation. So let's look at the wealth building aspect of it. As I said, don't you gentlemen think it makes sense to have a parent or a grandparent gift money to their child before they're deceased, so they can do one of many things? I mean, we talk about buying a home, which is one thing, but you can pay for your tuition. You can now determine whether you want to go from having just a BA to doing a law degree or an accounting designation or do medicine, or you can start a business or a consultancy. How common is that conversation among your clients where they're looking to help a child or a grandchild do one of those three things? And I'll ask Stefan the question. I'll have Stefan answer the question first.
Commonly, when a parent or a grandparent comes to our office, it's normally something regarding taking equity from the property to buy their children another property. Those three things that you mentioned about education, for their education, using it for a business, that typically doesn't come up in the conversation. I think it's something that's kind of in the parents' minds, where they want their child to get a head start, and owning an asset as a property is a good way to do it, even if it's a principal residence or even a rental, where some cases where kids over in their 30s still live with their parents, but they have rental property in their name. So to gain that rental income, as well as additional supportive income while they live with their parents and save substantial money. I believe because our database, our client base is very largely Afro-Caribbean. Many of them are nurses, people who are truck drivers, a lot of people in self-employed positions, where they have to start having these conversations with their children. And this is a great start to be here on this conversation right now, where you have a very candid conversation where that child wants to do with their lives, meaning Are they willing to, are they want to live with you, in the house with you, or they want to own a property, whether it be a principal or residence, a residential property, where they can decide their path on what they want to do. As far as clients that have children that are into small businesses, which we have clients that do, that's a conversation that needs to be have. I personally don't think that conversation goes beyond the surface level of what your child does as a business. So we have to take that initial extra steps to go beyond what our child does with their lives, circumferencing what they want to do, so we can better assist them to whatever they want to achieve. So just to circle back to your question, it's something that me personally, I have to start edging into the client's minds to start thinking about the future, because when they come in, it's more focused on their situation as opposed to the future. It's more present than the future. So for me, I would have to guide them to more thinking outside of the present, even though the present may look a little kind of unclear, but it's just to kind of weed out everything and make sure they look into the future for their children. And I want to add this because I think this is an important part of our conversation. I won't take too long about it. I bumped into someone I worked with back in high school yesterday, and we had a little conversation, and he said, "How you're doing?" I'm like, "I'm great." And then I'm asking him how you're doing. His first words said he was homeless, and took me back surprised. And he's not much older than me, and this is in the Mississauga area, by the way. He's like, "Oh, don't sweat it." But to me, I took a moment to think about what he said. I don't know his family dynamic or his circumstances, but him saying that he's homeless made me kind of take a moment to see how many young Canadians are in that predicament or on the brink of that predicament. So that being said, I just want to share that because I think it's very pivotal of what early wealth transfer can help a child, just by giving them that head start to have the Canadian dream of owning a home.
Yeah, that's tragic. And I'm going to dig a little deep into that, but I will let Andrew share his thoughts with us.
Yeah. Just to go back to the question of does it make sense? I believe it does, dependent upon how involved that grandparent or parent is going to be involved within that gift or that transfer, because it allows them to not only see the outcome of that gift and that transfer, but work with them to make sure that it's done properly. Now, I've been a part of conversations where the parent will either say, okay, my home is my major asset. I want it to go to my child. Does it make sense for me to put them on title now? Or does it make sense for me to wait till I pass away and then have that transferred to them? And that's if their home is their major inheritance, and that's what they want to give to their kids. My dad is in that situation. He's like, okay, worked all his life. His major asset is the home. That's going to be our inheritance when that's what his wishes are when he passes away. But if he was to access that capital now and said, okay, there's 4 of us, instead of waiting until us to say, okay, how do you want to split it? What do you want to buy out? Do you want to keep the property? He could circumvent all of that and start giving out portions of that early. Whereas, like Stefan said, if either of us is in a financial crunch, or if we wanted to aspire to start a business or get a secondary property, that gives us a head start without technically waiting until that parent passes away. So in a simple answer, yes, it does make sense as long as that parent is going to be there to want to see the outcome and work with that child to see, okay, what is it that you want to do with the money? And then if it's a gift, if I'm giving it to you, then I want to make sure that I'm declaring it as a gift, because a lot of people aren't aware that if you gift money to your child and that child then uses that money to go purchase a shareable asset such as a home with their partner, then that asset becomes shareable. But if you declare it as a gift in a registered document with a lawyer, and if it's just in that child's name, then that property does not become shareable. So there are certain ways that you can kind of protect your child in the sense of making sure that that money doesn't get tied up in a divorce or separation type situation.
Yeah, you guys raised some very, very important points in your responses. And circling back to Stefan's point about this friend we spoke to, I don't think many people understand the gravity of the housing issue in major cities across North America, even in parts of Europe, where many people are on the brink of being not having adequate shelter, whether it's in the UK or New York City, and we hear all these stories. So perhaps us having conversation or more serious conversations with our clients about how we can help each other scale up faster and easier could help us alleviate those problems. I mean, one of the challenges we have is that the landlord-tenant relationship, and I'm going off topic a bit now, is one that in many cities has a racial dynamic with. So if the person who owns the real estate in many cases is non-Black, and the person who is renting in many cases is non-white, then if we don't own the asset, we are at the mercy of that person. So I know it's a different conversation that we do in the future, and that's a whole different conversation. But coming back to Andrew's comment about the gifting and protecting the asset for the future, I had a client probably in the early 2000s who had that happen to them. It was a South Asian client. They were from India, I think, or Sri Lanka. Very successful immigrant family, and they had one son. And for those who were aware, South Asian families, that was called an arranged marriage, where there's no courting, there's no dating, there's no going to the club and all of that stuff. You know, the families have a conversation and they give you a spouse, they give you a husband, they give you a wife. And this family had owned hotels across the Niagara area, and their only son who had done very well, and they give their son, I think, about at the time, about $300,000. He bought a beautiful home out in the part of Toronto, and he had his wife and etc. And the marriage didn't last more than 2 years. And the cost of the divorce was tremendous. The process took about 4 or 5 years, and it left that young man with severe trauma because he felt as though he had done his parents an injustice by allowing this person and their family to not come after his father's wealth. And him and I, Stefan knows the young man, but he's not a young man, he's probably in his late 40s now, or close to 50. But yeah, I mean, it was a very, very difficult period for him. He had a lot of depression. So, the whole wealth transfer process, as both you guys mentioned, has to be a family conversation and has to be an ongoing conversation. The question I'm going to ask you guys now, how interested is the parent or grandparent? And I think we may have touched on it, but how often do we find that family sit down? I mean, look at the picture here in the graphic. We've got, grandparents, parents, and children. We've got 3 generations in front of us. How often do we sit down in one of our consultative meetings with clients, and we've got multiple generations of the same family having a discussion about the assets that the parents have accumulated and how they're going to use it in the future? Is that a common thing among African, Black, and Caribbean clients? And if it's not, how can we get it to become a common thing? And I'll let Steph ask the question because I see him smiling there.
Yeah, we have one thing I love about what we do is that we see different generations come in our office. So, for instance, we might see father and the wife with a teenager or adult, or just a young family. So we see all types of families come in. However, I feel that that conversation never comes up, unfortunately. I think people don't have these type of sit downs where you have like a weekly financial conversation every Friday or Saturday with your whole family. I strongly believe that we don't do that as a community. Based on my experience, when we start touching on certain topics like this, when you mention wealth transfer, it's instantly a deer in the headlights. Like, oh, I never heard this before. So I think for myself, it has to be more addressed to the client where they normally bring in their spouse or their child and have that conversation to say, hey, you have this property that's worth this much equity approximately is existing. You have a 22-year-old that lives with you. How can we help him get started in his home buying journey? If that's not the case, maybe he wants to live with his parents, where that's the case where some children want to just remain living with their parents. Does he have an interest? Is he into music? He's into the arts. Does he want to start an e-commerce business? How can we kind of jumpstart his business to help him flourish? And maybe that's what he needs to kind of start looking independently to his future. Because there are some kids that come that's in their 20s that are a little lost, and they remind me of myself, where they don't know exactly how to get started. So for us, they come to us to lay out the map, the roadmap to show them how to get started. And maybe your parents can be the one to give you that that boost to get started in any endeavors that you wish to get, whether it's a business or owning a property, furthering your education, learning a new skill, whether it be in tech or plumbing. Those are a lot of different things that we have to sit down with everybody and have a conversation about. And I don't think that conversation is happening at home. And like my dad said earlier, it has to be an ongoing conversation. It can't be just a month, 3 months, and then you kind of just let it hang in the wind. To build wealth is continuous. And if you want to maximize the potential, cultivating all that wealth, you have to do it regularly. And if you're here on this conversation today, this is a good start to bring what you heard, share it with your children, even bring them on the call if they can. I know it's summer vacation, and let them start kind of cultivating their minds how to, how to get started in their lives as well. As I shared earlier, there are kids that are on the brink of, mentally not well. I actually had a client that mentioned that to me earlier. So there's children, and it lives with her. So there's children out there that just need a kind of assistance on getting their life started, and this might be the tool to get them there.
I'm gonna let Andrew answer the question, but I'm gonna comment quickly before Andrew goes into his comments. I think Black folks have to start seeing wealth as a bad thing. I think for many Black folks, there's a love affair with poverty and struggle and grinding and working hard to get from point A to point B. And because of that, we work hard to buy a home. We work hard to invest in certain things or work hard at our business. And people are proud of working 20 hours a day. I see no pride in working 20 hours a day. You're foregoing quality of life and leisure, what I call 21st century slavery. So I think the first thing is a mental change of how we see wealth. And I think for a lot of Black folk, because we're usually on the wrong side of the railway track, particularly in many American cities, where you can distinctly see the divide between wealth and poverty, it's usually a racial thing, Black and white. I think we are uncomfortable with trying to achieve wealth. So that's the first, I think the first step we have to make. So I'll let Andrew make his comments, and then I want to basically ask a question of both of you. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. We usually stop at 11 o'clock. I don't see any questions from the audiences yet. Please put your questions in. I mean, I don't think we know all of the information, so I'd love to have some sort of questions from you so we can determine how to continue our future conversation. So Andrew, let me hear your perspective, please.
Yeah, my perspective on the conversation piece. It's rare that I have come across where it's been a collective effort. Usually the conversation is driven by either the parent or the child. And dependent on who comes through the door first, their needs are going to be not always in line with what the parent is willing to do or able to do. So as an example, if I was speaking to a younger client and I said, you know, the only way that you can obtain this property is if you get help from your parents. Have you had that conversation? And then the other roadblock is us as Black people, we are not comfortable in talking about money, especially from generation to generation. I can count on my one hand, how many times my dad has told me how much money he has, how much money he makes, what his assets are, what he plans to do. Those conversations are very uncomfortable most times for our community. So the hindrance of a younger child like myself, even attempting and getting the courage to go to that parent and say, hey, mom, dad, do you mind accessing your home equity so I can buy my property? I can get that door shut in my face so fast. It's like, access what? So that in itself, of the dynamic of that conversation, there's a couple of roadblocks there. But if you're able to have that conversation, and if you're able to get both parties in the same room and point out, okay, here are the pros and here are the things that you need to be aware of, then it becomes a much easier way to kind of break down those walls. But like you both said, it all starts with a conversation of somebody spearheading it. But the joint conversation, like the picture says, it's rare that that happens.
Okay, we've got about 3 minutes left, and I want us to do a wrap up. So in 30 seconds or less, how do we help our Black, African, and Caribbean clients plan an early wealth transfer successfully so everybody sees that? What are the top 3 things they have to do to get that conversation started and do it successfully?
Well, for me, I think the number one thing is know your numbers. What cuts through noise and what cuts through emotions is numbers. And if you can clearly show the numbers of this is how much is in your home, this is how much child A one or two needs, and this is how we can do it, and this is how the funds can be used, and here's how you can help control that situation, then I think that is probably the easiest method for me personally to be able to help start that wealth transfer conversation.
Okay. Stefan.
Yeah, I would have to concur with Andrew as well. Like, for us, we deal with numbers, and it eliminates the emotional aspect of it, and it gives a clear kind of illustration of what your objection is. So once we have that illustration in place, then we can kind of guide you to the path of early wealth transfer in this topic today.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a direct question, Stefan, so we can probably share with our audience. As a child who inherited parents' portfolio concept, do you think that you were part of an early wealth transfer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that is considered early wealth transfer.
I think more parents have to do that. There are many of us who have parents who have built successful businesses, whether they're restaurants, mechanic shops, trucking businesses, but the children aren't involved in the process. And we have to have the conversation. So what we challenge our audience to do, I know on this conference we've got, I mean, I've seen a lot of familiar faces, or a lot of familiar people in the chats, familiar names, I should say. I don't see any faces. I want to challenge you to bring your parent to the next conversation, or bring your child to the next conversation. Because the challenge, through our conversation, we've been hearing that, there's no communication between the two generations. And, there is a reluctancy for parents to share too much about their financial information with their children. And one of the things, we go back to one of the cons of early transfer of wealth is the self-care part of it, where we've heard children take their parents' money and put them in a home. If anybody who works in the long-term care facility venues, there's a lot of people in those homes who don't have any visits from their children or grandchildren, but inherit all the assets. So I think a conversation that is done sooner rather than later, from the time your children, the time you start your family, you should always start your wealth transfer conversation. Your children are 4 and 5 years old, start that conversation. Even to your grandparents, start the conversation. So there is no challenges as the parent gets older or the children get married. We don't run into those problems. So we're at the top of the hour, it's 11 o'clock. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. I have put up the contact information for both Andrew Stewart and Steph McMillan. Andrew is an insurance advisor, he's a chartered life underwriter, which means he has done a series of courses and accreditation to make him among the top in his field. His website is dfinsuranceSolutions.com, and his email is there. Stephen McMillan is a mortgage agent. He has won several accolades across the industry since he went into the industry. He specializes in reverse mortgages and many other types.
The graphic isn't showing. Sorry.
It's not showing?
No, we still see the first graphic.
Okay, I'm not. Is it showing up?
No.
Okay, let me try it again.
I'll just put my information in the chat.
Yeah, so it should be up there now then, I guess. The wonders of technology.
Yeah, it's there now.
To make your life very, very simple or very, very complex, very, very complex. So we're not technological gurus in the call, we are money, quote unquote, experts. So yes, here's the contact information for Andrew. Andrew has a wealth of knowledge and insurance products that can transfer money to the future generations. And one of those concepts is called the infinite banking concept, which is an insurance product that allows people to protect wealth. And in our next conversation, we can talk a little more about the tax advantages and the credit protection of the wealth transfer and how we use this process to do that. So Stefan is a mortgage professional who does all sorts of mortgages, going from reverse mortgages right up to commercial mortgages. And I always tell him, no deal is too difficult, because I am always here to mentor you if you run into a roadblock on a mortgage, because I've seen quite a lot of mortgages all the time. So again, I want to say thank you very much to everybody who joined us this morning. Thanks for spending 45 minutes with us. It's always been a good conversation. If you have any questions, you've got email addresses for Stefan and Andrew. Shoot them an email, or visit McMillanGroupInc.com or website, and just send an email to our website. So thank you very much. Have yourself a fantastic day. And we look forward to seeing you for our next morning money conversation in August. We're going to dig a little deeper into credit protection and that sort of stuff, how you can protect the wealth that you transfer from one generation to the next. Thanks, everyone. Stay well, stay safe.